What's going on, good people? This video, I'm going to be doing a coding challenge that was presented in a IT group that I'm in on Facebook. And so with this challenge, you have to essentially take the code that is already provided and modify it accordingly so that it will return the highest score that has been entered. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so here is the code snippet that was already presented. So as you see, this is written in Python. I'm actually do the coding in C# because one of the things was do it in the language that you're most comfortable with. But the example was given in Python where you take a input of student scores and then you iterate over each of the items in the student score inputs, and then you print those scores out. Now, the part that you're supposed to do is to take that output and then find the highest score in that input and then go from there. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and code this out in C#. This, first lines 2 through 5, and then we'll do the remaining code to add the logic in here. All right, so I already have a folder created for this project, but I do need to create a .NET Core project. So using the terminal that is in here, I'm going to do .NET new, and this will be a console application, and we will put it in the current directory. So we don't need to specify a project name. All right, and so the project has been created as well as the restore has automatically been done. So what I'm gonna do is to go ahead and open up the program file and let's see if we can get these side by side. So we can get this existing code over here with the new code. So they have, and I'm going to rename these variables so that they follow the syntax for C#, even though this original example is written in Python. So what is first is a string of student scores, and going to have that as a console.readline, and it does not take a input. All right, so we need to do a console.writeLine to display the message, input a list of student scores, and it has that string at the end of it, which I kind of don't like. Or excuse me, that space at the end, this space here, which I kind of don't like. And then we will do console readline of the student scores, and then it wants to split that into an array. So I'm actually going to change this input into input, or the readline into input, I should say, and then do a string of student scores as input dot split, and we're going to split with a space. Now in Python, I think it will automatically split it by space by default, but in C# you need to specify what that splitter is, and that will go into a string array. That should correct itself. There we go. All right, and then the next part is for in range. That is, while it could be done this way, probably not as efficient to do it that way. We could do a for each, but trying to stick with the code conversion as it is written, we're going to do a for loop of int n, where n starts with 0, and we will do the student n, excuse me, while n is less than the student scores dot, I believe it's size, no, length, no, count. Hold on, there's a method in here. Yeah, so n is, while n is less than student scores dot, there we go, dot length, and then n plus plus so that we increment, and then yeah, student scores n, and then you're taking that int into student scores, which is not necessarily the best way of doing that. Wait a minute. So you're taking the int and you're putting it into itself. Okay. So the problem with this, and you can get away with this in Python, is that they're taking the value of student scores, which is essentially a string, and they're typecasting it to an integer and then putting it back into the same variable. In Visual Studio, excuse me, not in Visual Studio, and .NET Core, you can't do that. You actually have to have a separate array that is defined because the variables are strongly typed. Now I could do a var, but if I declare it as a var initially, once it figures out what that var type is, then it can't be changed midway through the code. So that's kind of a difference between Python and C#. So what I'm gonna do is, so they created another one. So I'm just gonna create a int array of student scores int, and yeah, we'll set that to that. All right, and then when we get down here, we'll do student scores int dot add. No, we can't do that. Wait. All right, so instead, let me change this to a list of ints. There we go. And then equal to new list of int. Whoops. And we go ahead and try to build on my particular Ubuntu version. For some reason, when I am writing some code, sometimes the IntelliSense doesn't stay intelligent, and so you may write the set of code correctly, but it will still have the red line underneath it. All right, so line 16. So if we comment out line 16 and do a build, it should build successfully. All right, so the type list could not be found, so I'm missing a library, the collections library. There we go. All right, so now if we do a build again, let's see if we get it to succeed this time. All right, so the build succeeded that time. All right, cool. All right, so let's uncomment this student scores int list, and we'll do .add. Need to move that closer. Add, and then we want to add the student score. So student scores with n as the item in the array that we want to get out of here. And we want to add that, but in order to add that, we also need to convert it. So we're going to do convert int 32, and then student scores with the n there. Close our parentheses, and there we go. Now, last part of it is to print out all of the student scores, which kind of doesn't make sense to do that outside of the loop when you could have done it while in the loop. In order to do this in C#, let's see. So we can loop over each one. Probably not best to do it that way. So we'll do for each, and we'll do int score in student scores int, and then open braces student score, console console.writeLine or console.write. Probably need to do console.write, and then we will print out each score. So score with a space afterwards. All right. So this particular part here corresponds to the print. We'll do print student scores. All right. So that corresponds to that. All right. So now what we need to do is we need to find the largest score that is available. And since they are using, we're going to assume that they're using, well, yeah, there is integers. So we have to assume that they're integers. Granted, a score could be a decimal. But since they're specified as integers in this source, then we will stick with that. All right. So now that I'm done with that, we'll go ahead and loop through each item. So we'll use another for each, and we'll set the high score as a value, so highest score, and we'll default it to 0. That way, when we get to the end, we don't have an issue. And so the high score, so for each int score in student scores int. Now they're thinking, why are you doing it this way? Well, because the original code we're not allowed to modify. So essentially everything above this line, do not modify above here. So everything above this is essentially the original code that we were not allowed to modify. All right, so you have a for each, and you need to go through each score. So if score is greater than highest score, then highest score is equal to score, and then you will need to print out after you go through the loop, right line, the highest score is, and I'm going to use the replacement option here for that. All right, and so this should get the highest score, and we'll loop through each item and get the highest score. Now, the only problem that I see here is there is no exception handling for converting this here. So this may have an issue if you put a value in that does not handle an integer. But the instructions that were provided did not say that. So I'm not going to do that exception handling, but that is something that I did want to point out that now that I'm seeing it. All right, and so if we do a build, this should build successfully, unless there's something that I'm not fully aware of. All right, and so our build has completed. So let's open the terminal, and we'll do .NET run on this application. All right, so I'm gonna just put some random numbers in here, and nobody's made a 984. I'm trying to do 2 numbers really fast, but and there's always that one student that has that manages to get all the bonus points. All right, and so we have an exception. It does not throw which one is the invalid number, but it does say that there's an exception. So let's try to run this again and make sure that I don't have any spaces at the end. So paste, yeah. All right, so it looks like I had a space at the very end, and that caused a problem there. All right, so we got all of the numbers printed back out, and then as you see here, the highest score is a 101. Looks like some formatting might need to be done here to change this up. So let me change this to a right line. That way that comes out a little bit better than what it did. All right, and we can run it again, and we'll paste in the same values. Paste. All right, and so again, the numbers pasted in, and these are the output, and again, the highest score is a 101. So if we want to do it again, and then I'm gonna put the same scores in, but add an additional item here. So we'll say somebody managed to get a 103. And so there you have it. The highest score is 103. So like I mentioned, it does not have exception handling in here like it should. To be honest though, I think this example that was given, it was more so the kind of a rough example just to be able to allow you to do some programming in here, not so much. Now, if you want to improve this, which I'm about to do. The way I would improve this is that I would have an exception handling put on this. So if we'll do try catch block around this part here. And so now this part is beyond the scope of the coding challenge, but I believe when you have the opportunity to make things better, that you use that opportunity to make things better. And so what I'm going to do is, so we're going to say exception occurred, and then we'll do that, and then we'll do the string replacement as well as exception occurred for that, and then we'll put the message of the exception in here. So we'll put for the 0 placeholder, we'll do student scores in, and then for the number 1 placeholder, we'll do exception message. All right, and come back in here and format this document so that it looks correct. And with that, now we should be able to run this again. And if I make that same mistake again, like I did before, where I had a space at the end of the list of the input string, I believe it will throw that exception again, but this time we'll actually catch it. All right, and so there you go. So it threw the exception, but it caught it. I notice I also have occurred misspelled. And so this is what you want. The proper way of doing things is to be able to catch your exceptions if you know that there's a possible, especially when it comes to taking in inputs, that they may occur. All right. And so trying to see what else. That looks like that's it. So it's still giving the correct value for the highest score, which is 101. And that completes this coding challenge. If you have any questions, drop those down below. I'll be sure to answer it. This code here that I've done will be available on my GitHub repository. So if you are interested in seeing how this works and want to play around with this existing code, feel free to clone it from the repository. Till next time, peace out.